Hey everyone. So I'm not sure if you've heard already, but you are going to now about this documentary that was originally aired on BBC, but the CBC, Canada's Broadcast Corporation, has decided to give in or yield to the political activists that want to squash or quell any dissenting opinions or science-based evidence regarding transgender people and gender reassignment surgery that can have profound effects on their lives going forward. In this CBC documentary that I watched in full, the entire thing, because unlike most people, I actually pay attention astutely and meticulously to the kind of stuff that's put forth presented by anyone from all sides of the political spectrum or ideology. I want to hear what they got to say before I choose to whether agree or disagree or rail against them. I am not one of these people that is completely open to subjective bullshit and ideologically driven opinions or narratives where I just fall in line because, I recognize that they're from my same tribe or they espouse my same ideology. I'm all about thinking critically regarding any particular topic or subject that's presented or put forth. And when I watched this documentary, I completely come to terms and understood why the CBC chose not to air it. Because I know instinctively, because I pay attention to the hacks at the CBC and the kind of predominant narrative or opinion or ideology that they try to put forth and present. So I knew instinctively when I watched this video, this documentary, that no wonder CBC didn't want to air, because it'll completely go against and counter their dominant narrative they try to put forth and present on a regular basis. This is an opinion piece out of CBC News, which is why you're hearing a counter narrative. You'll never hear this narrative offered by anyone that's part of the establishment CBC. The only time you get any dissenting opinions are these outsiders that are allowed their opinion pieces once in a while. And I suppose it's only because the lawyers say, hey, if you just constantly do your one-sided propaganda without allowing anybody dissenting opinions, well then, the gig is up. You're never going to be able to even offer any suggestion that you have counter opinions or narratives put forth and presented, which is why they allow these opinions to come up. But I mean, think about it. If you get one opinion in comparison and contrast to 20 editorials or narratives created and presented by those who are part of that establishment media outlet, what are people going to pay attention to? What kind of gravity or weight are people going to put into an outsider's opinion in comparison and contrast to the dominant narrative by the CBC Corporation? It's done on purpose, folks. It's all political propaganda. It's bullshit and all about skewing opinions to the point where they keep you in line with their dominant ideology or their dominant narratives. Opinion. CBC's decision against airing transgender kids' doc should leave everyone unsettled. Ideology is now taking precedence over science. Last week, CBC was scheduled to air the controversial BBC documentary Transgender Kids, Who Knows Best, but scrapped the plan the day of, citing audience feedback and its own further review of the doc. Activists had argued that the film was harmful and poised to feed transphobia. In actuality, the documentary offers a rare and factual perspective on the politicization of gender therapy by featuring interviews with Dr. Kenneth Zucker, a psychologist and international research expert on gender dysphoria in children. Zucker also happens to be a former colleague of mine. Although his research and approach to therapy are scientifically sound, they counter transgender orthodoxy in ways on which I will elaborate below. But first, some background. In December of 2015, Zucker was fired from his position at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, CAMH, where he had served as head of the Child, Youth, and Family Gender Identity Clinic. Many activists who had petitioned for his removal claimed victory. What was so controversial about Zucker's approach? In short, he did not blindly follow the current popular dogma in affirming young children who say they want to transition to the opposite sex. Instead, Zucker's therapy was informed by research that showed the majority of gender dysphoria children desist by puberty. Indeed, across all 11 studies conducted on this topic, including research published in the last 5 years, about 60 to 90% of gender dysphoria children grow up to be gay in adulthood, not transgender. Zucker's approach was not about curing transgender kids or conducting reparative or conversion therapy, as some of his critics contend. Rather, it was about recognizing that it simply doesn't make sense for a child to undergo the challenges of a social or physical transition if they are likely to grow comfortable in the body they already have on their own. That is the so-called harmful view the documentary explores. So, I mean, think about this. There's nothing harmful about that. And I've listened, like I said, I listened to this entire documentary. And this gentleman, I mean, he's not a homophobe or a transphobe. I mean, if you just listen to what the man espouses and what he talks about, you realize he's a morally and ethically compassionate human being that's just hoping to, err on the side of caution for these young people that have some confusing aspects in regards to their sexuality or their gender preferences. I mean, my God, when we have got to the point where the media and some of these so-called professionals are railing against anyone having opposing views or opinions regarding, I mean, think about what it means for a child to go through transformative surgery from being a man to a woman or a woman to a man. I mean, that's a huge fucking thing. We don't allow these kind of decisions to be made for children, for whether it's driving or fucking, I mean, there's buying alcohol, or, I mean, think about how many restrictions we impose on children today because they're too young to be informed properly to make these kinds of decisions. But for some fucking reason, these political activists that seem to have a lot of power, and I mean, I can't help but think about someone like Kathleen Wynne and these fucking people that, their sexual preferences and shit are completely outside of any normal habits or behaviors for the majority of the population. But yet, they're the ones in these positions of authority. Right? And when you're talking about a province like Ontario, this is like the center core of putting forth and presenting these kind of fucking dogmatic, ideologically driven narratives regarding sex, gender, or what it means to be a man or a woman. I mean, of course, anyone should try to err on the side of caution and say, oh, before we start fucking turning little boys into little girls, surgically or with hormone therapy that can't ever be undone, right? Before you fucking affect their entire lives when they're just children, can we just step back and think critically about this stuff first? But like I say, these hacks, and there's a lot of them in the CBC. Hey, maybe these fucking idiots in the CBC have kids that they, I don't know, fit into being these, I don't know, whatever the fuck these people are. Like I say, sexual deviants, some of them, psychologically confused, mentally handicapped in some ways, or at least psychologically adolescent or underdevelopment of their brain, of their gray matter. There's some shit going on wrong with these people. But yes, there should be someone with sensible, fucking logically consistent narratives that should be able to step up and say, hey, stop with this stuff. Okay, let's think about this stuff first, right? But like I say, these political dogmatists, these ideologically driven leftists, these collectivists, these culture Marxists, these postmodernists, they don't want anyone to challenge their ideology. They don't want anyone to impose their ideas or preferences when they want to have their narrative be the dominant voice for the people. They try to shut down and quell free speech, as we see time and time again. They're the ones that are imposing their will on the people. And it seems like the political or pundit class or the ruling class seems to be more aligned in giving them or currying favor with those types, right? Than with what it means to have wide-ranging opinions or objective evidence presented and allowing the people to decide on their own. This top-down authoritarian approach where you just get to impose your will onto each other, it completely circumvents and negates any pretense of having any semblance of a free society. The minute you try to impose one particular ideology or political will on everyone else, well, then it's just a matter of, well, it's just a scramble and a race to see who can impose their will on the others. It's that race to the bottom that's going to end up with the culmination of all of us being stuck in the doldrums and having a much more difficult task of getting back to any semblance of objective reason, logically consistent principles, or morally relevant opinions and preferences. I'll post a link to this article in the description of this video below, but I do find this very disturbing to see how the CBC, they're so unwilling to allow the propagation of a wide-ranging and varying opinions regarding this difficult topic to flourish and propagate throughout the masses and allow the masses to think critically on these subjects and these topics for themselves. Right? Listen, that's your own fucking fault, CBC. That's your own fucking fault, you fucking piece of shit in the education system. If you fucking didn't fucking spend most of your time driving and hammering ideological preferences into the people, right? If you did your job and allowed them to think critically on these subjects, on these topics, there would be no problem. There would be no issues with allowing the people to have all these different opinions and preferences and narratives presented to them and allowing them to discern and disseminate what is more objective, what's more truthful, what's more logically consistent, what's more moral, and what respects and promotes individual rights. The CBC continues to show time and time again they don't care about any of those things. They only care about dominating and imposing their will on the masses. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.